Secretary-General, thank you so much for joining us on Americas Now. I want to get your outlook, given the current conditions in the global economy. I know that you are very much for multilateralism, but where do you think things stand now with the current U.S.-China trade war?
We projected growth of 4% or close to 4% a year ago, and we have just come out with our latest projections of 2.9% growth for this year, perhaps 3% by next year. That means we have lost around 1% of the world's GDP. And what is different in such a short period of time is these trade tensions. Why? Because when you invest, you do so to produce, you do so to sell. If you do not know whether you're going to be able to sell or whether you have access to a market or at what tariff you're going to be able to sell, then you hold back. And imagine that millions of people do exactly the same. They hold back because of uncertainty. Well, that is exactly what is going on right now. And this explains why in a short period of time, we've lost 1% of the world's GDP, but we could also go even lower. It could be worse if these tensions continue.
China is the world's largest exporter, with over $2.5 trillion worth of goods sold in 2018. During the last several years, China's exports to the U.S. were at least 4 times larger than U.S. sales to China. This led to trade tensions between the two nations beginning in 2018. So what needs to happen? What message do you have? And are you optimistic that there could be some resolution anytime soon?
Well, I'm never optimistic or pessimistic because it depends on a number of circumstances. I'm activistic, which means we are very actively trying to tell everybody, all the countries involved, but also all our member countries and the international organizations with which we work together to say, listen, this is having enormous impact. This is having terrible impact. This is affecting people's lives. This is affecting people's outlooks. It's affecting not only exports and imports, it's also affecting jobs. The growth of trade is now moving into negative territory. And as I told you before, investment is the great casualty.
The idea of international economic cooperation was born as a project for European countries only in the aftermath of World War II. But it was soon joined by Canada and the U.S. The OECD was officially launched in 1961. Today it has 36 member countries worldwide. They continually turn to each other to identify problems and exchange experiences on how to tackle them. I want to ask you about the BRICS Summit and the importance of these regional groupings, this particular one, groups developing emerging economies. How can they work together and how important is this partnership given the current global climate?
We in the OECD have a category of countries called the key partners. We had a long time. They used to call it enhanced engagement countries. Now they're called key partners. But they're still the same, and there's Brazil and China, India, Indonesia, and South Africa. Now, one of them, Brazil, has already formally requested accession to the OECD. We have programs of work with Indonesia, with Brazil itself, with China. We're now discussing the renewal of our program of work. So we're very active with this, I would call it this geometry of countries. Long before they were called the BRICS, we were already working with them. Then the R is Russia, which actually started the process of accession of the OECD. But then with the Crimea and the Ukrainian situation, that is now deferred until further notice. But with the rest of the countries, we're very active. We're at a critical moment, not only for the future of multilateralism.
Mexican-born Angel Gurria was the first appointed Secretary-General of the OECD in 2006. He had a long career in his country and collaborated with several international nonprofit organizations like the United Nations.
You're the former foreign minister of Mexico, finance minister. When you look across the region and you see some of the issues with Brazil, Argentina has been in trouble, Venezuela is in an economic crisis. What needs to happen, and do you have any advice for those countries or the neighbors who are actively working with them?
The complexity of Latin America is that the situation of Argentina and the problems they're having is totally different to the problems that Venezuela is having, and totally different to the problems that Brazil is having, or totally different to the problems that some of the other countries are having, because in many cases it's because of the drop in the price of raw materials derived precisely from the slowdown of the world economy, from the slowdown of China in particular in many cases, the slowdown even of the United States. And therefore, you have countries which are mostly exporters of raw materials which are suffering the consequences. But also, there's a problem of volume, not just a price, because to the extent that there's less economic activity, there is less consumption of everything, including the raw materials that we're feeding these economies. So you see a double whammy, I would say. You have a double hit, volume and price in many cases. Now, in many cases it's very political, like in the case of Venezuela, but it's having very tragic social consequences and humanitarian consequences. And in some cases it's more financial and economic, like in the case of Argentina. So you can't compare it. You don't have a single solution for everybody, but the result is that the growth in the region, it used to be like they had been navigating very, very competently through the crisis. They were doing a lot better. But then suddenly the rest of the countries are doing a little better, and then the emerging countries in Latin America not doing so well.
Secretary General, thank you so much. We really appreciate your time.
Thank you very much.